Good evening. Welcome to Backstory with Joan Goldstein. I'm Joan Goldstein. Our topic tonight is education. Is there a life and a death to education in America? I have two very special guests with me. To my right is Louise Wilson, was the mayor of Montgomery Township for 6 years, and was, as my close observation as involved with that group, one of the most dedicated people I've met in public office. She also was a fighter for the schools and for the benefits of the school, and we'll have a chance to talk about that. To my left is Phoebe Brown. She is currently a student in my sociology class at Mercer County Community College. Phoebe has a unique family history. She has educators in her family that go back 3 generations, is that right?
Yes.
It was grandfather and grandmother, mother and father, and now Phoebe, who wishes to become a teacher. So we're going to discuss American education today. Okay, a book that I used recently for the Princeton Public Library series I do called Talking Politics is The Death and Life of the Great American School System by Diane Ravitch, subtitled How Testing and Choice Are Undermining Education. She claims that they've turned education into a business model, as if they're looking for a bottom line, as if they're looking for a money translation into what comes out of education, most of which seems to frustrate teachers a whole lot. Also, to do my homework, I forced myself to go see a movie yesterday called Waiting for Superman, which I would probably subtitle Waiting for Frankenstein, because it seemed to me that it was very slanted in terms of whose point of view was being shown. I didn't see any teachers at all being asked anything about their experience or their needs or the difficulties of the job or the pleasures of the job. It was really pretty much slanted. And so I walked out of there shaking my head. But what do you think? Okay, let's start with Phoebe.
I think I agree that testing is being focused on a little too much in the school systems. I think a lot of students are more focused on just getting the good grades, maybe copying and pasting their essays a little too much, and just that's it. And especially in high school, it's all about the high school that I went to. There's a lot of focus on just the SAT scores, what college you're getting into, and not so much about what are you actually learning and remembering after you take the test. And I think the teachers should get a lot more credit, because I think there's so much more that goes into being a teacher than just the hour that you spend in the classroom for each class. There's the kids obviously have much more going on than just schoolwork, and I think teachers have to deal with everything that the kids bring to class, because they are also dealing with so much more. And so I think there's a lot more that should be focused on besides just testing in high school and college.
That's a really good point about what kids, I've noticed that, what kids bring into the classroom, including college students. I get emails from students almost every day. Someone else is writing to me about something in their life, some trauma, some health issue, that they couldn't come to class, but they wanted me to know that they really wanted to be there, and what could they do to make up the work. So it's very, you get a sense of, yes, they have a life, don't they? And
Yes.
a lot of stresses in those lives as well, even very little kids. There was, I recall at one time when I worked in New York City as a high school teacher, I was assigned by the Board of Education to work in an elementary school at 5th grade. And the class was considered the worst class in the school. They prided themselves in the fact that every teacher who was there had to leave. They couldn't take them. And then I come in, and I thought, what am I going to do? Well, I brought...
Nothing to lose, right?
You betcha. You betcha. And it was this, on the Lower East Side, it was the Alphabet Street, I think it was Avenue A. There was a lot of drug activity on the streets when you left the school at the end of the day. And the children were, as you got to see them and know them, lots of hardships. You know, one little girl looking very tired, and I'd say, "What's wrong?" And she'd say, "There was a fire in my building last night, and we were out on the street all night long." That would be kind of not an unusual thing for them to have. Or someone's mother or father had died, and no one was helping them with their grief. And so there was a lot to know and understand if you were aware of them. Of course, some of them were Spanish speaking, and they were used to saying things to each other that the teacher didn't understand, so they could do their devilish things. And I speak Spanish, so when they would say, "Corre, corre, run from the teacher," I go, "No, corre," and oh my God, she knows Spanish. So I had a big advantage there. And then I came in, I brought a puppet, hand puppet, and I taught them how to use puppets, how to make puppets, put on plays, which helped them with spoken English. I was, I had a plan, I had an agenda. They became the best class in the school. They were putting on plays in the auditorium for everybody. The principal couldn't believe it. But I have to say, I was exhausted.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about burnout. I mean, I was physically exhausted. It takes a great deal of physical and emotional energy when you are really focusing and working with people. And I think people who don't do that, sitting in front of a computer all day, don't understand that when you give this much, you also need a lot of encouragement. You also need support. You need help if there's problems with the kids. So I think the teachers are getting always shortchanged because people don't really know how much they give. Now, if we can ask Louise Wilson, you have been very involved with trying to help the schools in Montgomery Township. Why don't you tell something about what was going on and what you were trying to do?
Well, I should point out at the outset, I am not an education expert, nor am I a teacher. I guess I am an advocate and have just a tremendous respect for teachers and educators, and feel the role they play in society and in creating and sustaining a healthy, vibrant community is just absolutely central. And in Montgomery, of course, we pride ourselves in having excellent schools, and it's our school system, as well as our terrific location and beautiful natural resources. But the schools are a very big reason why a lot of people move to Montgomery. So property values are all wrapped up in the schools, et cetera. And because of the way education is funded in New Jersey, Montgomery receives very little state aid or state support, state funding for our school system, and therefore the lion's share of the responsibility for paying for public education is on the backs of local taxpayers. And that has created a very, very difficult situation in Montgomery, where on the one hand we place such high value on our schools and education, and on the other hand have a very high tax burden that is really, really hurting people. And so what I have worked on, and others, school board members and residents in the town, is to try to correct what we see as an unfair and very low level of support from Trenton for our school funding. To his credit, Governor Corzine got the school funding formula changed a couple of years ago, and the courts gave their blessing to a new formula that for a couple of years brought additional funding to Montgomery, but this year nearly 70% of that funding was simply taken away again and left us in a very tough situation. And the school budget was defeated by the voters, who sent a message loud and clear that they couldn't handle the kind of tax increase that they would have to absorb if they, the taxpayers, made up the difference between the, for the funding that was removed from Trenton. And so so the budget came to the township committee, and we could not reach agreement on what was an appropriate level of further cuts to the budget. I did not support the more extreme cuts that ultimately were put into place, and was fairly outspoken about what I see as the unfairness of the school funding and thus the tax situation that my residents and I, as a taxpayer, have to bear. So I do think, this situation has played out in Montgomery in a way that is troubling, because it has had a real impact on morale, I think, which is a very, you just never want to see in your schools any employees, never mind teachers, feeling downright vilified, actually, not by local residents, I don't mean that, but with this whole environment earlier in the year around the school budgets and, the posturing that took place that led to some, really, really unhealthy negativism, excuse me, around the whole topic of.
We see this a lot in anything political these days, right? A lot of kind of people are taking off their gloves, if they ever wore them, and they're being very aggressive towards each other. So these fights are getting meaner and meaner. And who suffers from this? Well, we know the teachers, the morale of the teachers, but doesn't it also filter down to the students, or maybe through the teachers down to the students?
Yeah,
as well?
I think the teachers probably work really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. And I'm not in the schools on a regular basis, and I can't speak to whether it's happening. I just know that in Montgomery we've worked really, really hard, the school board has, to contain costs per pupil. Our spending per pupil is well below the state average. Our teachers get paid less than the state average, and far less than in any other comparable district. But our tax burden is still very high because of that very small amount, because local property taxpayers pay about 90% of the cost of educating our kids. And so the former school board, the state education commissioner, former education commissioner, described Montgomery as the highest performing, most efficient district that he knew of in the state.
And so you're rewarded, and how is that rewarded?
Right. And,
well, let's give them a gold star.
And for that, right. and I don't mean to just be, singing the blues about one town. It is really a statewide problem. And yes, the dollars are tight, but the investment that we make in the public sector, in public education, is just, there's nothing more important, to our long-term prospects as a nation, to our competitiveness, to, to regaining the edge that we enjoyed for so many decades in the world. And as a friend of mine who's running for office higher up the food chain likes to point out, the U.S. used to be first in the world in math and science education and achievement, and we are now in the bottom third. And that to me is alarming. It really is.
Right.
And we cannot be, putting education on the chopping block and treating it as if it's a luxury. It is an absolute necessity, not just for academic achievement and smart kids, you know, but for the whole person, to educate people who grow up with open minds and intellectual curiosity and who are ready to learn throughout their lives, which is absolutely required in this world we live in now.
What do you think about that, Phoebe? You like to think, don't you?
Yes.
she's having, I always use her as a barometer in the class. When she's smiling, I figure I've just said something Phoebe was interested in or she liked. Then I want to know, what did I say, Phoebe? What was it we were saying before? That you liked something I said about using teachers or using robots. They're now talking about putting robots in the classroom, that little children just could sit there in front of robots. And what did we say about that? Do you remember?
I just think it's horrible that, you know, people need human interaction, and to have little kids in the classroom with a machine instead of a teacher who can emotionally relate to them is just the worst idea ever, I think.
Yeah, this is the point that we make a lot, is we forget that we are social beings. And this is not a light subject, it's a serious subject. We're social beings. It's because if we go way back in time, human beings worked together or perhaps cooperated with each other, and it's about survival. It was about survival and the development of language and communication. Well, we all know now that you can't put a child in front of a TV set, this station accepted, and put them in front of a TV set and expect that they're going to learn to speak. Because language and the development of communication is an interactive process. It's human being to human being. You can't get away from it. You can't get around it. So therefore, the responsibility for that has to be from the teachers, from the professors, and no matter how much they try to foist technology to replace them, it can't do the same job. It can't stimulate. I mean, if you were in a class and all they did all the time was what? Show you something on a screen or park you in front of a computer or a TV set. How do you think your mind what would happen to your mind, do you think, Phoebe?
I just don't think it would be interesting. I don't think I would be interested in it. I mean, I remember my third grade teacher, we had, you know, a reading hour, I guess, you know, like once a week maybe, and she would turn all the lights off and light candles and we would read books. And I loved it. It was the most exciting part of the week, and I remember we were reading.
Was that read aloud, or was it?
Yeah, everybody sat cross-legged on the floor, and she would sit on a stool and just read novels. And it was,
how wonderful that is.
You know, you can't get that from a machine. You know, and I think that's the most important thing, especially for little kids.
We just get away from.
Powerful.
Yeah. Powerful. Oh yes. Yeah, I was working last year locally for a Chinese school here, and I was doing the English language part of it. So I would go to our library every week looking for what would be an interesting book. And I wanted to combine background in American culture to acquaint them with American culture or different cultures in America. And I would find just the right book. And then I would read it to them. And it was wonderful because they were like 7 years old or maybe up to 9 years old. They would, first of all, want to take off their shoes and sit back, you know, like this. They wanted to be comfortable because this was a time when they were going to really enjoy it. It was very interactive, and it was a lot of fun. I really, truly enjoyed it. I think everyone should be reading to children. One interesting memory I have, when I was a child, my mother was a child of immigrants, and my grandparents apparently did not really speak English or much English. And so my parents were first generations to go to school at all, and they didn't go very high up either. But my mother wanted to enrich us with culture. This was a big value of hers. So every night, my brother and I, she would read us from Shakespeare. She read aloud the plays of Shakespeare. She would read a few lines and then stop and sort of put it into maybe our level of language. And I distinctly remember us saying to her, so what happened to Romeo? Or why did Juliet do that? Or, you know, and we went through, I think she read The Merchant of Venice. I think she, you know, a little bit every night. So by the time I encountered Shakespeare in school, it was like a piece of cake to me because we had been, you know, dealing with it. We had no idea that that was unusual. So, you know, there's more, I think, also including, we've got to work more with the parents to get them to do more enrichment. It can't all be left in the hands of the school and the teacher. And I think what's happened is everybody's parking somebody in front of a cell phone or a television set or something, or an internet, and thinking, okay, that's babysitting. But we don't want babysitting. We want, you know, if you watch young children, what's so interesting about them is they are so responsive, curious and responsive. And it's wonderful to see them getting interested and wanting to know what's going on, what's happening here, who is this person, you know. I think that's so fascinating. We must remember who we are as human beings and keep that in our school, in our education system. It doesn't matter whether you're a first grader or whether you're a college student. It doesn't, you know, it's all part of who we are. Did your parents or grandparents talk to you much about how they felt about teaching and education?
Yes. What I wanted to go back a little bit to what you were talking about before. My mom taught 7th grade in Franklin Township, and she quit after a year because she said it was the hardest job that she ever had to do. I mean, dealing with, you know, the kids and the problems that the kids were going through at the same time, trying to, you know, teach and have a meaningful lesson for them, and, you know, going home every night and preparing for the next day, and just being completely overwhelmed with just the amount of, you know, work was, I think, you know, I think she definitely deserved a lot more credit, and I think teachers like her doing the job that she was doing definitely deserve a lot more credit than they get, because it's not just being a teacher, it's, you know, it's being somebody there, you know, for students who, you know, are going through a hard time, maybe, you know, middle school, I know it's like the most, you know, difficult time in anybody's life, and I don't think I know any person that would want to go back to middle school and
they could help it.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, yeah. So, you know, it gets back to this business of, yes, there's money and cost, and then there's humanness and the human element, and are we really aware of the contributions that we take from people and how much it takes from them. I know when I first began teaching at Mercer some years ago, a person who was then, I guess, vice president said to me, called me aside with the dean, and they said, you seem to have a very interesting approach to teaching. Would you want to do a workshop for the others and sort of show them what you do or whatever? So I said, okay. I started something that went on for about 6 years, and it was it was called the Adjunct Connection, because they only would let me work with the part-timers. But I would take topics like, how do you work with students when they don't like your subject? Or, you know, this kind of real meat and bones type of thing. And how do we understand that the student really doesn't hate you? They're going through some terrible experience if we took the trouble to find out, or if we understood what their life was like. And one woman, Anne, wonderful person, Anne Lee, she said to me one time, you know something? You made me remember that my students are human beings. And I thought, wow, isn't that profound? Isn't that profound? How is it how do we not remember this, you see? And perhaps a lot of the things we see that are so disturbing in the schools, the bullying and the mistreatment and intolerance towards each other, is that also a product of the fact that we're not recognizing that we're human beings, and that if you treat people with respect and humanity, don't they give it back? Isn't it more of what might be, you know, who knows if that's part of the problem? How do we get there? How do we wake up the people who want to test you to death and then siphon off, and this is another hot ticket, siphoning off public funds to charter schools, which essentially are free-for-alls in terms of, you know, they're like private schools, except they got the benefit of public funding. That's another issue that I have questions about. Are you?
That's a really tough issue, and I think that, you know, different communities and different school systems, I mean, I can very much understand how charter schools have a real foothold in some places, and I absolutely understand why parents want to have a choice sometimes. And so I think that that's something we really do need to grapple with. And I don't know, you know, the whole issue of funding is such a tough nut I talked before about, fighting for Montgomery's fair share and how it isn't, just Montgomery. But I think that, to the extent to which we in New Jersey rely on property taxes to pay for education is way, way too high. And we have to reach a better balance and not rely so heavily on property taxes. If that is the case, maybe there isn't quite such a dogfight for the dollars, that we have. And on one hand, it's hard to call them scarce dollars because it's a huge amount of money, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And on the other hand, what we try to do with education in this day and age, it ain't cheap. And it's important that teachers be compensated well and feel valued, and that we have the resources for kids with special needs and all of that. All these things are just so expensive. But talked before about Jeffrey Canada's the movement. What's happened in the children's zone up in Harlem is just nothing short of miraculous. I mean, the lives are being saved up there, and and he talks too, by the way, about the just extraordinary value of Read Aloud, and involving that, turning that into a tradition in the family. And I too remember in grade school, elementary school, teachers setting aside time, some of them every day, some of them once a week, for Read Aloud. And I mean, that's 45 years ago, and it is still just absolutely fresh in my mind. Those were extremely powerful, formative hours or half hours, in education. And I'm rambling a little bit, but I do think that that in some places, in some communities, charter schools are doing really good things, and they are, forcing a discussion about what's the right way how do we do best by our kids, I don't know what the answer is. I really don't, and I understand the anxiety and the frustration with the sense the dollars are siphoned away. I don't know how to rectify that, but
I think
it's not a simple.
No, it isn't. But
matter.
I think we need to talk to teachers more. We need to bring them into the discussion more than they seem to be, and that would be one thing. And also, there's the students. Talk to somebody like Phoebe, and she'll tell you what she likes and doesn't like, and she's interested and she's motivated. We need to talk to the people who are directly involved in it. And I think far too many people are putting in charge of it, becoming superintendents, not around here necessarily, but other places, who have barely even entered a classroom except maybe for a photo op. And I think that's wrong. I think that they're inventing their own world and their own ideas, but it's not based on reality. Well, I want to thank you both for coming here today, so we could talk a little bit about something that's so important to all three of us, which is education, American education. I'm planning for my next show to look at religious tolerance. I have some religious leaders of different religions coming on board. We're going to look at down the road at small businesses. I have some very interesting small business people who are working to keep that alive and keep their business alive. And and a farmer. Yes, a farmer from a family farm. We visited his farm last week, didn't we, Phoebe? The whole class did. So we're going to look at that as well. He's part of the small business picture, but also growing local food and how much we want to think with all the industrialization and post-industrialization, how we want to get back to local and smaller units of growth. And thank you very much for coming with me today.
Thank you.
On a wonderful journey, and see you next time with Backstory with Joan Goldstein.